You are a cultural pioneer, or as I'd like to say, a culture-neer. You're daring to go where others aren't willing to go. The unknown doesn't scare you, it intrigues you. You're not satisfied with the status quo. Business as usual is not in your DNA. You're done with doing the same thing and expecting a different result. You're an explorer at heart and a trendsetter by nature. You were born with purpose, called to lead, destined to make a difference. You are a Culture-neer.
Listen, welcome to another episode of the Culture-neer podcast. I'm your host, Terry Gwaltney, and wow, you're in for a treat today. I've been spending the last few minutes just talking with our guest, Matt Tressider. He's the CEO, co-founder of the organization LEADR, which is a digital workspace company that just really works to build effective leaders and healthy teams. And we all know, if you're listening to this show, the organization is only as healthy as the leader. And so he's a co-author. Some of his books, Management is Dead, 5 Keys to Unlocking Employee Retention, Skyrocket Your ROI, Lead a Revolution. I mean, this is going to be just a fantastic talk today. He comes from New Zealand, so overlook the accent. I'm just kidding. Right in God's country in Dallas, so he went from New Zealand to being a cowboy. Hopefully not a cowboy fan this year. That would be a lonely.
Oh, man.
Anyway, Matt, welcome to the show.
G'day, Terry. Good to be here. I've tried to be a Cowboys fan. It's not going well.
Yeah, well, me too, but yeah.
I moved to Seattle. I spent 6 years there, and I was there like right at the peak of when the Seahawks were taking off. I was there for the 1 yard line Super Bowl, and then I moved down to Dallas. I'm like, I'm going to be a fan here too, and we're going to go to the Super Bowl. It's not going well.
Yeah, you have to go back to the 90s, I think, to realize that dream. But something crazy. You pay somebody $50-some-odd million, and then suddenly your season tanks. It's crazy. I don't know how that works.
Isn't that weird? Isn't that weird?
Anyway. Man, I'm excited for our audience just to hear your story, the phenomenal things that you've done. Can you share just a little bit about your journey from New Zealand to Dallas to LEADR?
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, it's a windy road. So yeah, like you said, originally from New Zealand, got a strange accent. It's a lot better now, though. I'll say that. I joined a tech company actually in New Zealand called PushPay. Their vision was to see generosity unleashed by inventing a mobile giving app. And so they invented a mobile app for churches and charities. I came on board as employee number 5, like right at the beginning. We were working in a garage above a gym, like true old school startup moments. It was fun. And we quickly started growing. We found product market fit pretty quickly. And then I became their first sales manager, which was basically go out and hire your friends, and then you can kind of lead them, I suppose. And that was when they're like, you can be a manager. And then we moved our headquarters over to Seattle. And then we just hit hypergrowth. We went from 5 to 500 employees in about 4.5 years.
Wow.
I eventually became the VP of sales. So it was just a wild story of never being in sales, never being in a startup environment, never being truly in a leadership role. And then I look up 2 years into this journey and I've got 150 people in my team, and I'm just looking out and thinking, man, how did this happen? And trying to figure out how do we lead people effectively through that process. I mean, we faced so many growing pains, but as I look back on it, the thing that we did right is we realized when you have a healthy leader, you've got a healthy team. And when you've got an unhealthy leader, you've got an unhealthy team. And so we try to just have a real strong culture of development and pouring into our frontline managers, kind of what you said earlier. Because I realized, like, as much as I feel like I had the right intentions for leadership, if I'm not equipping them, everything falls apart. So we can get into all of that, but that's kind of how this happened. And then, I moved down to Dallas end of 19, started this company LEADR. I've got a little baby girl who's 8 months old. I've got a little golden doodle called Lucy, and then my wife, Kaisa. So that's us down here in God's country. Wow.
That's awesome. I love the startup stories. I mean, there's nothing like living that and then sharing that and what that builds on the inside of a leader. It sounds like you woke up and was a victim of your own success, probably wondering how in the world am I going to continue to lead this pack, which I think is probably the story for so many entrepreneurs and startups. They were great at an aspect of their business, but then trying to figure out, and I feel so unqualified on how I'm going to scale this, how the core values are going to filter down to 250 people across 6 locations or whatever
Right.
the case might be. I'm guessing that all of that fed into your passion to create LEADR.
1,000%. 1,000%. I mean, when I wrapped up there, I took about 6 months off. I just wanted a break. I'd been a part of the bubble for 6 years, and I just needed some time to refresh and go see friends and family and do our belated honeymoon. All the things that we delayed just because our one mission was building this company. But I had the itch when my now co-founder Chris called me and said, "Do you want to do it again?" I said, "Absolutely. I'm not going to go back and work at some big boring bank like I used to. I want to do something that's actually going to have meaning and purpose." And I certainly am addicted to the chaos and the things that break and are on fire every day in a startup environment. So there was never any other way for me. It was like, we're going to have to go out and do something. Now let's do something that we're the most passionate about, which is developing people.
And where do you think the origin of that came from? Obviously, you've seen the need firsthand because you probably needed it yourself, like we talked about. But where do you think the roots of that began for you?
It was a very selfish reason to start. I'll say that, which was, if I could go back and do it again, I wish I had led differently. I wish I'd been more consistent. I wish I'd had a playbook. So I'll give a couple examples. We used to do something called a quarterly T3B3. It was kind of like a 360-degree review. So the T3B3 is you send to your direct reports, your boss, and your colleagues, what are my top 3 skills and what are my bottom 3 skills? And it's anonymous. And so every quarter we used to send it out. And I remember very distinctly, this was April of 2015. I sent it out to a group, probably a dozen people. And one person said, "Matt is literally the best boss I've ever had." That was in the top 3. And those are the moments where you're like, okay, pause, we're good. Put it on LinkedIn, write the book, done, story over. But then you keep reading, and the bottom 3, someone said, Matt comes across as distracted and uninterested. Matt always feels like he's too busy to help, and he gets defensive when we shoot down his ideas. And so I had this weird moment of, how in the world does the same group of people view me as the best boss they've ever had, but also at the same time, he comes across as distracted, uninterested, and defensive, and too busy to help. And so I there was this almost like introspective moment of like, if I don't fix some of the deficiencies in my own leadership, and I don't work through what it is that people feel like I get defensive, which I do because I get passionate, then I'm going to end up being the worst leader they've ever had. And so it was moments like that, I'm like, no one wakes up every morning thinking, I want to be the worst boss. I've never met that person. So then why the heck in exit interviews and why the heck in surveys do we get a ton of feedback about how frontline managers suck? It's because we don't equip them. And so that again, it was selfish. It's like, okay, I've got to look inwards. How do I fix that bottom 3 so that they don't turn up again next quarter?
That's so good. I remember, so one of the things that we do is every 3 months we do what we call a strategic planning meeting. It's always offsite and overnight. And so we have 2 different levels of leadership that we invite into that group. And by the first night, the entire team is there. So it's kind of our executive team. And we have an agenda. We're planning our year obviously is broke down into quarters. And so, we're evaluating our wins for, the last 12 weeks, so on and so forth. We're also doing the overall health, of our company and the guys that were in it. And one of the things that we had threw on there this particular time, because we don't do it every time, was we were going to do an exercise where we went around. We'd only done it one other time, so most of these guys hadn't participated because it had been years ago. And it was, I want you to tell me one of my strengths, and then I want you to tell me one of my blind spots, what my weaknesses are. And so we were running out of time, and we were going to table it. And 2 of the guys spoke up. He said, "Oh, no, we can't do that." He said, I was so looking forward to that. I said, "Well, okay, we'll make time." We moved the agenda around. So there's a big bonfire at night. And when this started with, I'm going to say there was 12 or 13 guys, this is going to be awkward for some guys. I want you to, first call out what you see in that person that you admire about them. And then I want you to tell them an area that, that they think is probably a blind spot you need to grow in. This is going to be uncomfortable. 2.5 hours later, guys were still going around this circle. And what, to my amazement, it wasn't that they were just pointing out those things. It was just like for you and your 360 that was like so eye-opening, when you sit there and heard it. But But what was happening is when they give the affirmation of, when I see this,
Right.
and it was bringing so much life out of those guys that they just wouldn't be still. I thought, this is so powerful, on both sides of that. The one I thought, well, the blind spot would be eye-opening.
Yeah.
But honestly, what was so eye-opening is how much life that it was giving when a peer was saying, you know what, I love the patience that you have when you're dealing with people, or when you're in this high stress situation and nobody really knows that. And I want to aspire to be more like you in that area. And so I think, we came together because we're just now onboarding with, your company LEADR, because we feel like we have a very healthy culture. And our mantra here is, we're a leadership development company. We just happen to provide these home improvement solutions.
Right.
And so we were wanting to build people, but we wanted more of a playbook that would accelerate our growth and kind of put more of a structure around how we could scale that. And I knew that you were working with John Maxwell and his organization, which I've admired for obviously decades. And then David Salyers, I seen that you were working with his company Rome in Atlanta. And so there was a lot of credibility that began to come with that. I just want to say we're excited because I think what you are offering is a need for almost every business that's out there. I mean, I think you're answering a cry to so many of those needs. So kudos to you.
Well, thank you. And kudos to you. I mean, I got goosebumps when you shared that story. Like, we all have blind spots, but what an interesting thought that we can have blind spots on our positive attributes too. I guess I've never quite thought about that. It's like the power of calling out someone's, the impact they have on you that they probably don't realize that they're having on you. That's powerful. I don't know if you have one of these things. I call it my rainy day folder. I've got an Apple Note that's just filled with all the things that people have said to me over the years that give me air under my wings. And when I've had a tough day, I go and kind of scroll through and read some of the things that people have said about me. Mm-hmm. Man, it fires me up so much. It gives me so much life to go and tackle the next challenge the next day. And sometimes it just takes a little bit. And so there's probably a bunch of leaders listening that maybe need a little bit of encouragement, or maybe there's someone you work with that needs it and they're never going to raise their hand and ask for it. Go grab a bonfire. That sounds phenomenal. I love that.
Yeah. There's two really interesting questions we ask in our selection process when we're interviewing potential new candidates for a team. It's always so insightful. And one of them is like, tell me about the worst boss that you ever worked for. Mm-hmm. then you begin to hear, and why was that? But then you flip that around and the very next question, now tell me about the best boss that you ever worked for. Man, it is so insightful, because the things I think that many of us as leaders would totally miss are the things that are the most important many times.
What do you hear? What are some of the things that come up?
He always believed in me.
Yeah.
He was so great because he would take the time to teach me and was just so patient with me. In other words, if you boil them all down, probably the most common thing is that leader slowed down long enough to make that person feel like they were valued and not just a number. Mm-hmm. That was probably the biggest thing. And then on the flip side of that, if you boiled it all down, it was just the opposite. They really didn't value my opinion, me as a person, just everything about the entire system and the process that we really didn't matter.
Right.
So we were just kind of a cog in the wheel. Obviously there's very specific replies, but if you boil them all down, they kind of fall into those two things, which I think is so interesting, because we know people don't quit companies, they quit bosses, they quit managers. That's right. They quit leaders.
That's right. Yeah. And I've learned over my years as well, when you're having a tough season and you don't believe in yourself, you can certainly trade on the belief that others have in you. Mm. And so the reason why me and my co-founder, Chris, worked so well together is he was the CEO at the last company. And when I was coming up through the ranks and just feeling like the world was caving in and feeling like I had none of the answers and I had imposter syndrome and all those insecurities that come to surface when you have a lot of people relying on you, and I didn't believe in myself, I traded on the belief that he had in me, because he constantly would reiterate, I believe in you. You're the right guy. Here's the 10 things that you do that make you the perfect fit for the seat. And it's so true that the belief or disbelief could literally mean the biggest thing of how engaged or how productive your team could be.
Oh, I mean, yeah, 100%. And I think this is part of our mission. Even one of the reasons why we even do this podcast is because culture is so vital to the health, not just of the organization, but I mean, who is the organization? I mean, it's the people that work there. And so, if you're living in a toxic work environment that is just so negative, there's no way to turn that completely off and not have the residue of that following home.
It's true.
Which, shows up in your relationship with your kids, shows up in the relationship with your wife, but it's also the opposite. Man, if you're in this life-giving culture that's just breathing, life into you and you feel valued and they're putting a demand on your potential and they're celebrating you and they're rewarding your efforts and you're growing in that environment, then you're also going home and you're growing in becoming a better man or a better woman.
It's so true. It's so true.
If there's a way that we can connect those dots for more leaders to look, if I buy a program like this, or I invest in a trip for my employees, or I do this, it's affecting my bottom line. Yeah, it is, in a positive way. You need to switch the perspective, and this is not a liability and a cost, but it's an investment into an asset, your biggest asset.
Yes.
That will show up for sure on the bottom line.
The best framework that I've heard that kind of encapsulates all of this is the SMART versus healthy framework from Patrick Lencioni. Have you come across that before?
I've read a lot of his stuff, but not that particular book.
It's in The Advantage, and he lays out two columns. So you've got a picture on one column, you've got SMART, which is everything that we do in business, which is things like strategy and finance and operations and technology. And Patrick Lencioni has said, well, he has consulted with all the biggest companies in the world, all the executive teams, and he said, I've never walked away from an executive team thinking they need more smarts. They had the right resumes, they had the right industry knowledge, they had the right degrees on the wall, they were smart enough. But the other column is healthy, and healthy is things like minimal politics, minimal confusion, morale, productivity, turnover. And so he said, every time I've walked away, I've thought to myself, they can get healthier. And when you get healthier, you end up getting smarter. But if you get smarter, you don't get healthier. And so that word like toxic or just ineffective culture or ineffective leadership, it's everything, right? What's the John Maxwell quote? 90% of problems can be traced back to a leadership problem.
Yeah.
And so when you think about how politics or confusion or morale can be impacting your entire business, that's really the crux of the issue. Instead of going and tweaking like your strategic plan and your financial plan and working on your marketing plan, actually maybe the root cause of why you're not seeing the results you don't want to is because you don't have underlying trust. You don't have cohesion. You've got unhealthy politics. And so that framework for me was such an unlocking moment, which is, how do we just have healthier teams? How do we have healthier leaders? And if we solve for that problem, everything else kind of takes care of itself. Now, it seems overly simplistic to dumb it down that way, but the things that keep me up at night is things like politics and confusion and morale and productivity. I don't stay up at night wondering about our financial plan next year. I'm worrying about our culture and our people. So I think that's true of most leaders.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is. And it's very telling. I think if you go into places that have to have a giant employee handbook or policy manual, that's very
bingo.
It's real. It's a big indicator of the health of a culture.
Bingo.
That healthy culture is so much about permission giving. You only have to have all of those rules and regulations. When the culture is unhealthy, you're trying to regulate stuff.
Oh my gosh, ain't that the truth? I've never seen someone like policy themselves out of a problem. Like, oh, we're just going to put another bylaw within the employee handbook. That doesn't fix anything. That's like playing defense versus offense. That doesn't work.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm probably ticking someone off right now, but that's all right.
That's okay. Sometimes that's the only way to bring about change.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So let's peek into your personal life a little bit. So like, what's the favorite part of your morning routine as a busy CEO?
Well, now it's the fact that I've got our little miracle baby. So a little bit of our journey. We've been married for coming on 8 years now, 7.5 years or so. And we struggled to have kids that almost that entire time. We got all the reports from the doctors saying that everything was wrong with our blood results. We went through 3 rounds of IUI. We did a round of IVF. We had a miscarriage. And so that was just the hardest season for sure. Way harder than anything we faced in startup land. And then this year in February, right after the doctor told us less than 0.5% that you're ever going to get pregnant via natural means, we had our baby girl, and her name's Ada Joy. And so I call her a miracle baby because she literally is. And so my morning routine now is wake up whenever she wakes up, and then hopefully get a workout in somewhere in the midst of the 5 a.m., 6 a.m. window, and then go for a walk. And that's just the perfect way to start the day. And then, the day kind of takes over from there. But that's like the very first thing is get a workout in and then spend time with the baby.
What's the favorite way to unwind at the end of the day?
Reading fiction seems to be the only thing that gets my brain to switch off. So reading business books, I'm always constantly thinking, how do I apply it here? When I'm watching Netflix or movies or whatnot, my brain still seems to keep going. But if I'm reading fiction, and when I say fiction, I mean like true garbage. Like I'm reading Tom Clancy, I'm reading Lord of the Rings. I'm literally trying to think about what's something that I can engage with that's got nothing at all to do with software companies. That's the thing that like gives me life. So if I can sit on a beach with a margarita and some ceviche and read Lord of the Rings on my Kindle, that's my happy place.
There you go. Any magical moment that comes to mind you'll never forget, or you may have just already told us about it, but.
Magical moment. I mean, certainly becoming a dad. Let me think about something within the workplace. I think it's the moments when people have gone out of the way to say thank you or to share encouragement that I wasn't expecting. I think a lot of leaders will resonate with this. It's very rare that someone will knock on my door and say, hey, Matt, can we chat? And they close the door behind them. I'm like, okay, here we go. Someone's going to resign. We've all had those like random Wednesday afternoon drop-ins. And then they sit down and they say, hey, I just wanted to tell you, you're doing an incredible job. That never happens, right? It's always, hey, I wanted to tell you about Susie, or I wanted to tell you about so-and-so, or I'm going to be wrapping up here. So I think any of my special moments is just when, I can't pinpoint one exactly, but it's just when people have gone out of the way to say, hey, thanks. You know, you're a great leader. Keep doing what you're doing. I know what you're doing is tough. Oh, actually, I do have one moment. Literally, last week, one of our staff members, Kiana, said, hey, I know the leadership team's going through a lot right now. I know you're making a lot of big decisions. I just want you to know we're praying for you. I thought that was, I had no response. I didn't even have anything to say. I was gobsmacked. I'm like, thank you so much. That means a lot. Wow.
Yeah, I think there's so much to be said about those little things. Sometimes people have no idea, just that one little word, how much of encouragement. I think we look at people sometimes like, well, they got it together. They don't really need to hear that. And it's the people that you think have it together that really need to hear that.
Yeah, that's right. It's the inverse. It's the inverse. It's that imposter syndrome thing of you thinking you're the only one, but the reality is we're all kind of figuring it out. Yeah. My favorite quote to kind of debunk imposter syndrome is Steve Jobs said that your life changes the day you wake up and realize that everything around you is made up by people that are no smarter than you. And it's so true. Everything that was the infrastructure, the power grid, everything was established and built by people that are no smarter than we are. And so the imposter syndrome is just this like farce that you just need to shake and realize like we're all in the same boat together. And to your point, and I love that, the folks that say that they're not that way are actually the ones that need the most help.
Yeah. You know, one of the goals I think when we do this show is like, you know, experience is what we all get from screwing up and making our own mistakes.
Yeah.
But wisdom is obviously learning from the mistakes of others, which again is why I'm an avid reader. I mean, if I can spend $25 in 2 hours reading a book that is 25 years of somebody's life experience, I mean, that's the cheat code that I want to operate in. That's the kind of investment that I want to make. Talk to us about maybe a significant failure that you experienced or went through, and what was the most important lesson you learned from it?
Well, I think, isn't it funny? I can think of like 5 stories immediately when you asked me earlier, like what's a standout memorable moment? You can never think of the positive things. Our human brains are so wired in the wrong way. So here's the first one that came to mind. It was about 3 years ago. So this is not all too distant past. I had someone come into my office, one of our staff, and they were clearly having a tough day. I could just see it over their face. And I was like, hey, are you doing all right? And they're like, I'm fine. I'm like, okay, no worries. And we kept talking about something else. And then I pressed again. I was like, hey, are you doing okay? Is there anything you want to chat about? And they said, no, I'm not doing well, but my boss told me not to process things with you. So we're just going to ignore it. And I was like, say that again? And she said, yeah, literally, my boss said, don't go and process things with Matt. He just likes to make decisions.
Oh,
that hurt. And it hurt the most because she was right. I get really frustrated when we're sitting in a room that, whether it's venting or whether it's just unraveling a thread, and we're not moving the conversations towards like, okay, what are we actually going to do next? What's the decision we're going to make? And so I get really impatient. And then when I get impatient, I get passionate. And then when I get passionate, I get defensive. And so I literally remember hearing that comment. I'm like, that is a terrible way to be known as a leader, is that people aren't even going to process things with you because you're just trying to be like, okay, how can I solve the problem? So now I've had to learn to, and I still struggle with this all the time because I just get impatient. I'm like, we don't have time for this. But I've learned to say things like, hey, are you just venting or are you just processing, or is there something that you need from me? Because if you're just processing, that's fine, but I need you to vocalize that, because otherwise I'm going to be problem solving in my head the entire time you're speaking. And that's not what you need from me. So please tell me at the outset of the conversation, and my team does a great job of this because of this gap. Brett, my CFO, will literally say, hey, I don't need anything from you right now. Let me just process. And that is so freeing, because then I'm like, okay, I'm just going to process. And then I probably problem solve it anyway, but at least the disclaimer was up front.
So how long have you been married?
7 years.
Did you learn that skill at home first, or did you go apply that skill at home after you learned it at work?
The latter. I applied it at home after I learned it at work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the average woman, I've been married 38 years. I wish I would have known this 38 years ago. Obviously, most of the time doesn't want us solving the problem. They simply want us to listen, be the sounding board. And that is so hard, because I think whether you're in sales or you're a husband or you're a CEO, most of our brains are wired like, I'm listening to respond. I'm not naturally just listening to what you're saying. There has to be a purpose behind this. And so
there has to be a purpose. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm listening for you to pause long enough for me to solve the problem or give.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Which, depending on the personalities, as we've all realized, is not real life giving to the people on the other end. So.
Yeah. So now I'll get things. I'll get comments at home, which is helpful for me, where she'll say, "I don't need CEO Matt."
Oh, it is helpful though.
I mean, you're right. Ouch. You definitely don't need CEO Matt right now.
Yeah, I think women give us men far more credit than what we deserve. It's like, yeah, we are really that clueless. So a couple of hints along the way would make this easier for both.
I genuinely need it. Yeah. I'm like, oh, you just want you? I'm just here to make all the decisions. It's like, no, that's not at all why you're here. Just sit down, shut up, and listen. I'm like, yes, ma'am.
There you go.
So yeah, no, that's
happy marriage.
Yeah, that dang straight. But I would say that was a key failure of leadership, of just being such a galvanizer and such a mover that one of the other ways this came up in a feedback survey once was learn how to be a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. Ooh. And so to me, a sledgehammer was just like, think something, say something, and just swing the scythe. And that's not helpful for change management. That's not helpful to bring people on the journey. And so being a scalpel is more about like threading the needle and taking people on the journey and allowing folks to have the same level of processing that you did before you make the decision. So that's kind of interrelated to the first one, but there's actually a benefit of what's the Ranger saying? Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Taking the time to actually slow down means you move faster. That's still a tough one for me, because I'm like, we do not have time.
Yeah. What's interesting is it always goes back to what our greatest strength is, and one area tends to be our greatest weakness in the other. You're going to operate with a scalpel, you have to have a lot of patience, and probably what's made you a mover and a shaker is that you got things done and you got straight to the point. And
right.
It's just, it's interesting. I think that's the greatest knowledge, is self-awareness.
Bingo.
And you have to have the right team around you in order to be able to empower you. And I think so many leaders, we're so insecure, we don't staff to our weakness. We staff to our strengths because it makes us feel better, but it doesn't really help us.
Doesn't help us. You got to have people that are willing to stand up to you. Especially the CEO title. I think any fancy title in general, but especially the CEO title, it does something to people. Like, they laugh at your jokes, they say yes to you, they think all your ideas are solid gold, and they're not. So you got to surround yourself with people that are willing to tell you no, that are willing to tell you your ideas are dumb. To your point, it's like the iron sharpens iron.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you kind of just walk around completely clueless.
Yeah. Living in a bubble.
Living in a bubble. Yeah. I had the opportunity to meet Frank Blake, who is the ex-CEO of Home Depot and has just an incredible story. He had 450,000 people at one point when he was the CEO of Home Depot, which I cannot even imagine. But he said when the torch got handed to them and he was speaking to the chairman, he said to him, he's like, be careful of the CEO title. People are going to start laughing at all your jokes. And it's true. When I first stepped into the role, there's this pandering feels like a blunt way of saying it, but there's this like deference, this like unhealthy level of deference where because this fancy title is now being bestowed upon you. And so I think being aware, I think self-awareness, you just nailed it. It's like being aware to the point of like they're pandering to the title, they're deferring to you because you're the big cheese, and then recognizing you've got to mind for conflict. You've got to not just assume that people are on board just because they're nodding and smiling. That is still a huge point of growth for me, and not just leaning on the CEO title to move things forward. It's just that's not effective leadership at all.
Yeah, that is so true. So sounds like you're a natural born entrepreneur. Does that gene run in your family, or is this first generation?
My dad is built his own business. My granddad did as well, inherited it from his father. And so first time in software and in tech. But I think one of the beautiful things about being a Kiwi, which is a New Zealander for the listeners, Kiwi is it's funny. So Kiwi is a tiny little flightless bird. It's an endangered bird in New Zealand, and it's completely useless. It can't fly. It can't do anything. It's like, and apparently, I mean, they're illegal to eat, but apparently they taste like delicious chicken. So I don't know why we call ourselves Kiwis, but I'm a Kiwi. And one of the cool things about being from New Zealand is we have this like underdog thing in our veins. So our national rugby team called the All Blacks, they're the most winningest team in history. And I think there's just this like, we're a tiny country of 4.5 million people. We're going to go take on the world. And so I think that spirit of entrepreneurship comes out of me in the best way possible. And then when you move to Dallas and there's more people, when you're flying into DFW, there's more people you can see than there is in my entire country back home. There's something about like, okay, the opportunity here is vast. And so that underdog spirit, that Kiwi spirit, I think is where a lot of the entrepreneurship comes from.
That's good. Yeah, it's a fascinating book about your rugby team. I'm trying to recall something about legacy.
Their culture is incredible. Speaking of culture, they have one thing where the whoever wins player of the match, like the MVP award for the match, is handed a broom at the end of the game and sweeps out the locker room.
Yeah, I read.
I love that.
Yeah, it was powerful. It didn't take you very long to realize how they've been able to cultivate that kind of culture.
Bingo.
Bingo.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. So I think that's probably where the entrepreneurship comes from. But you kind of just learn to end up loving it. I think I didn't know that you could love being in the workplace so much. I mean, the previous jobs I had leading up until the last one, I hated all of them. I worked at a university bookstore. I worked at a bank. And although I enjoyed the people I worked with, I wasn't fulfilled. I wasn't making an impact. There was no mission and purpose behind what I did. And so it was almost like the scales falling from my eyes when I first jumped into a world where I could be mission driven. And maybe that's just the millennial thing in me. I mean, one thing we could be said about millennials is they really just want to do something that matters and has purpose.
Yeah.
And so I think the moment I got a taste for it, I was like a dog with a bone. I could never let it go.
So give me your definition of culture, because I think it's so interesting. It's all relative. You can ask, everybody's heard of it, but I got to ask 10 people and get 10 different answers. How do you summarize the definition of culture for you?
Culture is if your values are being lived out on the front lines. So a quick anecdote, when my CEO started the last company and a buddy of mine interviewed with him, he said, what does success look like to you? And he said, that our company will look more like the values when I leave than they were when we started.
Whoa.
And that was success to him. And I think that's a beautiful measure of success, because often, I mean, we've got core values here. One of them, for example, is we operate as a championship team. It doesn't matter if that's on the wall or not. What matters is Monday through Friday is the folks on the front lines, do they actually operate like a championship team? So that's what culture looks like. It's not what my all hands talk was. It's not the newsletter that I send out every week. It's not It's not any of that. That's not what the leadership team says it is. It's actually how people are treated and how they're valued Monday through Friday.
Yeah. And why do you think that is so important for an organization?
Well, the existential reason, and we could go down many rabbit holes on this, is I think humans find purpose at work. And so when we lack purpose in the workplace, we lack purpose in our entire lives. And so I think this drive to retirement is a really unhealthy way to think about your life. I think we're meant to work. I think we were built to work. And I think we find connection and purpose within the workplace and with what we choose to put our hands to. And so it matters because if people hate their jobs, it's not about they're not productive at work. It means they're not healthy in every facet of life. I think a pretty common culture in New Zealand, which is really sad, is you get to work on Monday and everyone's asking, what are you up to this weekend? What are you doing on Friday? Where are you going? What are you going to do on Friday night? So everyone's automatically just fast forwarding to the end of the week. And when that's 70% of your time here on earth, that's just a really unhealthy way to live. And so the existential answer to your question is like, because humans have to find purpose at work.
Yeah. Well, and I think until you find purpose, to your point, I think people struggle with direction and discipline. And sometimes what we perceive as a discipline problem with people on our teams, it's really a purpose problem, which boil it all down, it's a leadership problem.
Yeah.
You got to give them a vision worth following and a mission, worth pursuing if you're going to have purpose, and suddenly discipline and direction begin to come into play in their life.
And it's beautiful. I love that. And I think what people need to hear, and you said it earlier, is like, we're a leadership company. We just happen to do it through helping maintain homes. Yeah. I mean, there might be a lot of folks listening saying like, well, I work in a manufacturing company. I'm not out there. I'm not working at a nonprofit. I'm not building wells in Africa. I'm not working at a church. It's like, no, that's not the point. The point is the purpose of what you're doing behind the thing that you're doing, the underroot why of why you exist doesn't have, just because you're building widgets, it doesn't mean that you can't find purpose in what you do. And for you to say, isn't that a Chick-fil-A line? We're a leadership company that sells chicken, or some version of that. I think I've heard David say.
Yeah, I think I've heard one of their. Yeah, I believe it is.
Yeah, and so I love it. Like they're a fast food restaurant. No, they're not. They're a leadership company.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive, really. If you can get that kind of mindset with your people, just how it causes them to come alive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you've never tasted it, well, I'll put it this way. I think a lot of people back home don't understand why I work so much. And until you've tasted what it means to love what you do, that word work, it's not the same. It doesn't have the same meaning to me as it used to. Like, this is just what I do. I love it. Like, it's not work to me. If I have to respond to emails or do some planning at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday night, I love it. It's freaking awesome. And so it seems obtuse to hear that outside looking in if you've never quite had a taste for feeling like an owner that's invested in something that's actually going to move the needle on all the people around you in a mission that matters.
Yeah, I remember exactly where I was at when I just really felt like, you know what, part of my purpose is helping other people discover theirs. Mm. And when I began to take that thought process into our culture, and that kind of became a mission, because you're exactly right. People come alive when they realize I was created for this. That old statement of, find a job you love and never work another day in your life. I mean, that's how I feel. My wife, we were just having this conversation. I said, I love what I do. I love the people that I work with. I've never had an intention of retiring and not working because I had to work for money, but because I have a sense of purpose that I'm doing something that's much bigger than money.
Yes.
What you're seeing in lives. And I think as leaders, if somehow we can grasp that, because that's where engagement happens. We try to measure all of these things and sit back and try to figure out, what's the symptoms? What's the problem? How do I get people engaged? But the answers all lie in what we've been talking about for the last 10 minutes.
Yeah.
The engagement is just a natural byproduct. Once you begin to slot people, into their gifts, once you begin to give them a sense of purpose, once they realize that they're valued, it's really not as difficult, I think, as what we've all made it out to be.
I think so. What the Mike Rowe, the Dirty Jobs guy, he said, success in life is found at the crossroads between your greatest strength and your greatest passion. And I think there's a piece of that might be missing, which is like, I think it has to be wrapped in the will of God, or wrapped in the will of like, what is your underlying purpose in life? But truly, when you're in a season where your strength and your passion aligned and you're in that crossroads, it's such a fulfilling place to be.
Yeah. I know we're going to have to land this. We could talk forever, but what's a piece of advice that you would leave with our listeners today on just how they can grow as a leader?
Well, so one thing I'm taking away is your bonfire story. I don't think I've done that enough recently with my leadership team. I think you said greatest strength, great can be your greatest weakness. I think one thing that we do really well here at LEADR is we're just a freight train. Nothing's going to stop us. And we do not take enough time to stop and smell the roses. So selfishly, one thing I'm taking away is I think I need to have a bonfire moment with my executive team sooner rather than later. So I think I came here for that moment. So for what it's worth, thanks. For everybody else, I mean, well, let me just share a couple of things. First, the line that I've been sharing with leaders this year is leadership is a burden, but the burden is a privilege. And so
that's good.
If you want to step into leadership, make sure you're going in eyes wide open. When you carry that burden of leadership for the first time, it's a lot. If you've never led others before, if you want to be an owner or an entrepreneur and you don't understand what the weight of payroll is, it's a lot. It's a burden. But let's not have a pity party. The burden's a privilege. And so the ability to lead and the ability to impact others is so worth it. So I think that's the first thing I wanted to share with folks is leadership's a burden, the burden's a privilege. I think the other thing, and I just want to maybe pull at the thread that you started right back at the beginning of the conversation, is good leadership matters. And you probably really hear the impact you're having. So just keep doing it. You are having an impact on those around you, whether you realize it or not. So don't give up. Don't move into cynicism. One of my favorite lines is, it's better to believe the best in others and be proven wrong than to believe the worst in others and be proven right. And so continue to believe the best, even if you're not getting the positive feedback loop. You really get it anyway. People are just coming for you for negative things. Keep leading healthy and keep doing the right thing. There are stories happening in your circle of influence, whether you hear them or not, and leadership just matters. So I know that seems overly simple, but I really want people to hear that.
Yeah, it's so profound in the same token. So, tell the folks listening today where they can find you at, find out more about Matt and what you're doing.
Yeah, so I'm not a big social media guy. I think that's one of my superpowers is not getting distracted by a bunch of things that doesn't help me actually grow. So I'm not on the Twitters of the world or the Facebooks, the Instagrams, but I am on LinkedIn. So you can follow me on LinkedIn. I post a weekly blog. We have a podcast that's coming out. And then if you want to learn more about what we do, it's leadr.com without the second D. So it's LEADR.com.
Yeah, and you're going to be one of our speakers this year at the Ripple Effect in February. So can't
wait.
Yeah, it's another great opportunity. We'll be talking more about that as we get closer. But February, I believe, 22nd at the Mountain Dew Park. And we're just going to have some world-class leaders there, Matt being one of them. And you're not going to want to miss that event. I'd like to ask one more question, kind of the big one. How do you want to be remembered when your life here on earth is over? What kind of mark do you want to leave that just can't be erased when you're gone?
The thing that my family has that I want to continue is I want to be known for being generous. My grandparents and my parents are both incredibly generous, and they're known for that. And so I want that to be continued through the Tressider name. I want to be known as someone that was generous with their time, generous with their resources. That's how I'd want to be remembered. A
legacy of generosity. I love it.
Yeah.
Man, it's been great to get to know you a little bit better today. I think what you're doing is so powerful, so needed, and man, what how rewarding that has to be, because we know you impact and influence a leader, you've impacted and influenced an organization, and then families, and then you just scale that all the way down, and that's multi-generational. That is powerful.
Yes.
So kudos to you again. I appreciate so much what you're doing. Looking forward to working with you with our organization. To see how it benefits me and our people. And appreciate you taking the time to be with us today.
I love it, Terry. Thanks for having me. This was fun.
Guys, remember, culture is only healthy as the leader. We'll see you next time on the Culture-neer podcast. Terry Gwaltney from the Culture-neer podcast. Listen, I want to say thank you for listening to the podcast today. I also want to encourage you to help us get the message out to more people. If you could like, share, and review this, content on wherever you consume it. You go into YouTube or LinkedIn or just whatever your social media channels are, and you could even share it. That would be a big help to us here at the Culture-neer podcast. Also, if you'd like some more information, you can go to www.terrygwaltney.com, where we have updates. We also have more resources. We share articles there. And you also can find our new book there called The Culture-neer. Again, we want to thank you again for taking time just to listen to the podcast or view it on YouTube. It's our goal to spend 20 or 30 minutes each time we're together to help grow your culture to a point where your employees refuse to leave and your customers can't resist. This is Terry. We'll talk to you soon.